Should you ditch your design process? Well, there are 3 ways to think about whether or not you should. If you get nothing else, you need to understand that your design process should lead to the outcomes that are necessary for your team, based on the time that you have, the maturity of your organization, the money and resources, and the appetite for experimentation on your team. If you look around online, you'll find any number of articles and courses and boot camps and, well, YouTube videos that will try to sell you on the best design process or design methods that you could use. The reality is that most designers don't really think too strongly about which processes and methods to use in order to meet the outcomes that they need to meet on their teams. Today, I want to give you 3 principles that you should use to measure whether or not your process and methods are helping you get to the outcomes that you need to get to as a team. Before I get into that, let's talk real briefly about how to know where you need to be. Now, this could be an entire video, but the really quick way to explain this is based on the maturity of your product. Notice I say product, not necessarily team. The maturity of your product will depend on any number of factors, like how new it is to the market, how many monthly active users you have, and in some cases can be measured based on the stage of your company: seed, Series A, Series B, etc. Now, generally speaking, the more mature your product is, the more refined you want and mature you want your product process to be, or your design process to be. This is because you need to be very careful with how you implement new features or refine existing features to make sure that you're not alienating active users or long-term customers that could potentially have a detriment to the long-term health of your product. But in an earlier stage, or if an earlier life cycle in your product, you might actually be a little bit more loose with your process to be a little bit more experimental and to try new things for your newer users and newer customers. Particularly if you're trying to grow active users or increase the number of contracts that your sales team is signing, it might be okay to be a little bit more experimental and not necessarily go through the entire strict design process, as we like to say. Now, these 3 principles are fairly simple. The first one is making sure that your process is helping you identify and solve the problem at hand. The second one is to make sure that you're using your energy and time effectively and efficiently. This kind of extends to the rest of your team as well. But your third one is also helping you collaborate with partners and users or customers. Now, the first principle will be roughly the same no matter your maturity. You always want to make sure you're identifying and solving the right problem. Now, generally speaking, I would classify your problems into 2 main areas. There is a product and direction problem, and then there is kind of the interaction and design problem. And basically what this means is, with product and direction, you're thinking more about what is exactly the thing that we're building to implement and solve particular problems for users. And then interaction and design will be more about how and what kinds of design principles and interaction patterns and how do we design the thing to actually help a user facilitate solving those problems. And you might even break them down into problems about navigating through a product or documenting a certain thing. Particularly in healthcare, we spend a lot of time thinking about documentation and navigation through workflow. And so because of that, I spend a lot of my time in kind of this interaction problem, but then that problem also ladders up into a product problem, which is a general philosophy around how does someone actually use a particular product like this. Now, using energy effectively and saving time is probably the one with the most variance between the maturity stages of your product. In an earlier stage product, you're going to be prioritizing shipping things pretty quickly so that you can learn from them and iterate on them. Whereas in a later stage company or product, you're going to be spending a little bit more time earlier on to refine and really get the thing right before you spend a lot of time shipping it. So early on, you might actually be thinking about solving the right problem, which is actually just a product issue, and then your interaction and design solution might actually be fairly basic. You might not spend as much time there as you do kind of in the problem definition and product definition. In later stage, you might actually think more deeply about how the interaction and design needs to be a differentiator based on the problem that you're solving. This also, I think, is important because it helps you think about the levels of fidelity. When you're using your energy effectively, you're not necessarily going all the way down in super deep detailed design problems when you're still trying to figure out the high-level product definition. And likewise, if you're kind of always thinking about the high-level product definition, you might not ever get into thinking about how does the different types of navigation patterns actually make our product more effective in the long run versus another product in the market. So being sure that you are using your energy efficiently and effectively for the right maturity stage of your product is key. And the last thing here, again, probably pretty similar across stages, is making sure that your design process is helping you collaborate. Now, designers don't work in a vacuum, and designers that do, I have done this myself and been in this position, is often probably not going to be as effective as when you share and you are able to collaborate. Now, collaborating should mean a couple different things. First and foremost, it should mean that you are collaborating with the people who are helping you build the product, whether or not these are engineers or PMs, other designers, or maybe major stakeholders in your company. The second people that this needs to be helping you collaborate with are, generally speaking, your users and customers. The more that you can involve your users and customers in the design process, the more successful or more likely you are to be successful in building something that truly fits their need. Now, this can be anything from doing user interviews and user research to actually showing them and doing testing with them. But one of the things that I think is really important to understand is that user testing in and of itself doesn't always have to be these perfectly crafted, beautiful prototype tests. It can be as simple as just throwing some designs on the screen and actually just getting our users' feedback and kind of impressions based on what they're seeing. This is one of my favorite ways to do some testing with users through my project Alloy, where I spend a lot of time just kind of bringing up designs and letting someone talk me through what they're seeing and how they think they might use this thing. Now, is it as good as actually watching them use it? No, definitely not. But for me, where I'm trying to just kind of get a general understanding of a perception of a new product, it can be really helpful to kind of get those perspectives and ideas very quickly without me having to feel like I need to build this really complex Figma prototype or a code prototype. Now, the other thing that's really useful about making sure that you're collaborating, of course, is that you can create a shared understanding. To me, this is one of the most important things to do, particularly when you're working with engineers. I actually like to involve my engineers in breadboarding and object diagramming in my day job so that they have an understanding of where my head's at when it comes down to actually building the product. I don't think this is probably going to be that revolutionary, but again, depending on your stage, this can make or break the ability for your team to ship something quickly or to really think through the details before that thing gets into production. Ultimately, all of these three principles are designed to do is help you evaluate what the methods and processes you're using. Sometimes it's definitely possible to be spending too much time in research before you ever actually get to designing and trying to figure out what it is that we're going to make. And likewise, it can be very easy to jump too fast into actually iterating and creating a new thing without actually doing the research to make sure that the thing is necessary in the first place. My hope is that when you think about your design process and the methods you use for that process, that you're thinking about the outcomes that you're trying to get to, not whether or not you're exactly abiding by the right process. For sure, if it's not working, you should change it, and you should iterate and experiment on it just like you would on an actual product. Your design process is meant to actually help you ship and create things that people can use, not meant to be a process for the sake of process. Don't be afraid to experiment with different methods like breadboarding or object-oriented design. Don't be afraid to actually maybe even skip pieces of the process if you have enough context and information already. I know it's been possible for me in the past to actually skip over doing some user research and interviews because I have so much to lean on from people already in my company who have done things, or I can actually go out and find interviews and things that people have said about a particular product and use that to inform my solution before I start showing things to people. Now, there are always things that you should be doing with your design process. You should always be talking to your customers and users about what you're building, and you should always be thinking about how to iterate and improve the product that you're building, whether or not that's from a visual perspective or from a UX perspective. But it's also equally as important to make sure that you're building a product and building a process that fits the outcomes that you need to be aiming for at the appropriate time. I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned something. If you did, I'd love for you to give a like and subscribe down below. Let me know if you have any other thoughts about making your design process fit your outcomes. Am I completely off my rocker? If I am, let me know. I'd love to have a conversation about it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you real soon.